They say when a people cannot speak, they sing. When they are not allowed to gather, they dance. And when their voices are silenced, they let the drum speak for them. In the time of colonization, when soldiers arrived with flags and rifles, they brought more than just violence. They brought silence. Not the kind that settles over a quiet field, but the kind that creeps into language, into movement, into memory. It was a silence designed to erase, to flatten voices, to make people forget who they were and where they came from. But the people had a different plan. Long before ships arrived on foreign shores, in the lands that would be renamed and redivided by European hands, the drum was already there. It beat like a heart. It called people across rivers, from forest to mountain. It told stories, passed down prayers, carried news, and connected villages in ways that written words never could. The drum could speak. Among the Yoruba, the Akan, the Yu, the Igbo, there were drums that literally talked. Their tones and rhythms mimicked language itself. You could say someone's name with a drum. You could send a message from one village to another, carried on the air through a coded rhythm. In some cultures, a mother could send a message to her son in a neighboring town, and he would know it was her, just by the pattern. The drum was not entertainment. It was a language. And so, when the colonizers came, they noticed something strange. At night, when the plantations were quiet, they heard it, the soft rhythm of drums echoing through the trees. The enslaved, the displaced, the broken, they were still singing, still drumming, still dancing. It terrified the masters, not because they understood it, but because they didn't. Why? They asked. Would people who had lost everything still dance? Why would people forced to build empires they didn't belong to? People who were forbidden to read, to write, to own land, to speak their native tongues, still find rhythm in their feet. The answer was simple, because rhythm was memory. And memory is dangerous to those who want you to forget. So they banned it. Across the Caribbean, the Americas, in South Africa, in India, colonial laws were written to silence the drum. In Jamaica, in the British colonies of the American South, in Haiti, enslaved people were forbidden from playing drums. Forbidden from gathering in large numbers, especially at night. Even singing was watched carefully. Because in the words of one colonizer, the Negro sings too much when he is planning a rebellion. You see, they'd learned the hard way. In more than one revolt, the signal to rise up wasn't shouted. It wasn't written. It was played. A rhythm in the dark. A beat no one white understood, but every black man, woman, and child knew by heart. The drum was a sword hidden in sound. But here is where the story deepens. Because even when the drums were taken away, the people adapted. They buried the rhythm in their bodies. In the stomp of a foot, the clap of a hand, the sway of a shoulder. The song hummed under their breath in the fields. What the colonizers didn't know was that the music had never been just for joy. It was a code. And now, it became a code of resistance. In Brazil, the enslaved people began to practice something that looked like a dance, flipping, spinning, moving in circles. The colonizers called it a game. Something foolish. Something harmless. But it wasn't. It was capoeira, a martial art disguised as celebration. Hidden inside the music were the movements of war. Kicks that could break bones. Dodges that could save a life. In the middle of plantations, disguised as fun, they were training. In the American South, spirituals filled the air. Songs like Wade in the Water or Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. The masters thought they were hymns, cries for heaven, but some of them were maps. Wade in the water meant move through rivers to throw off tracking dogs during escape. Follow the drinking gourd was a coded message to follow the stars north toward freedom. A plantation could be silent during the day, but at night, the songs would rise. Sometimes they were sad. Sometimes they were joyful. Always, they were layered. And always, they carried more than the masters could hear. In Haiti, where the greatest slave revolt in history would take place, the revolution was called in rhythm. The night of the bois came in ceremony. The beginning of the Haitian Revolution was filled with music, drums, chants. The colonizers called it madness. They called it witchcraft. What they didn't understand is that it was preparation. The drum was saying, "It's time." Even in places where drums were allowed, they were often watched. In Trinidad, enslaved Africans were banned from drumming during carnival. So they turned to bamboo sticks. They pounded the ground, created rhythm from whatever they had. That eventually gave birth to the steel pan, a new drum, born from oil barrels that now defines the nation's sound. Out of silence came a new voice. And there is something poetic about that no matter what they banned, no matter what they broke, the music came back stronger. Because it wasn't just art, it was survival. And survival, under colonial rule, often meant remembering what you were not allowed to say out loud. In South Africa, miners working in the dark, forbidden to talk, invented gumboot dancing. Wearing rubber boots in flooded mines, they slapped their legs, stomped, and created a whole language of taps and movements. It became a way to talk without words, to joke, to warn, to resist. Colonizers thought they were just dancing. In the eyes of empire, music was often seen as harmless, as background, as culture. But it was never just that. It was a shield, a sword, a book, a prayer, a message, passed down in plain sight. Even today, those rhythms live on. In hip-hop, in reggae, in Afrobeat, in dancehall, you can still hear the echoes of drums that once spoke in code. The pain, the pride, the resistance. You can hear the voices that were never truly silenced. Because music remembers. You see, history books were rewritten. Languages were erased. Land was renamed. But rhythm kept speaking. It's in the way your grandmother hums while cooking. The way children stomp in games they don't realize are ancient. The way a church choir sways, or a carnival band explodes in sound. Even now, the drum speaks. You just have to know how to listen. And this is only the beginning. They destroyed the drums, but the sound remained. Not in the air, but in the bones of the people, in the palms of their hands, in the arch of a foot rising to strike the earth, in the throat, in the breath, in the hum beneath the surface of speech. In Haiti, the rhythm turned into fire. The plantations were heavy with silence, but not the kind the colonizers wanted. It was the silence before a storm, a silence so full of history, rage, and memory that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue, what is now Haiti, had been listening, and they were done waiting. In the forests, far from the eyes of French planters, the Vodou drums beat again, not in celebration, but in declaration. They weren't just calling spirits. They were calling war. The ceremony at Bois Cayman in 1791 wasn't a performance. It was a gathering of warriors, strategists, spiritual leaders, and survivors. The drum rhythms that night were not for dance. They were for unity. They said, "We are one. We remember. We are ready." The colonizers heard noise. What they didn't realize was that they were hearing the countdown to their own end. And it worked. Within weeks, plantations were in flames. The rhythm had become revolution. A revolution that succeeded, the first of its kind, defeating the French, the Spanish, and the British. Haiti became the first black republic born from the ashes of slavery. And at its root was the rhythm they had tried to erase. Elsewhere, in Brazil, the resistance looked different but was no less brilliant. After centuries of forced labor and forced forgetting, enslaved Africans formed quilombos, communities of escaped slaves, free black people, and indigenous allies, hidden deep in the forests and mountains. In these communities, the old ways lived on. They practiced religion, cooked traditional food, and danced without fear. And at the center of their defense was capoeira, a deceptive, graceful art that looked like a dance but moved like a blade. Capoeira wasn't just about fighting. It was about freedom disguised as joy. It was about saying, "You cannot control me," in a language the colonizer couldn't understand. While the oppressors laughed at the movements, Those movements were teaching people how to block, flip, strike, and escape. Inside every twirl was a memory of someone who had survived. Every kick was a message, we are still here. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, drums found new shapes. The colonizers, terrified of African noise, tried to ban them outright. In Jamaica, the Maroons, escaped Africans who had formed self-governing communities in the mountains, used abang horns and drum calls to coordinate attacks, disappear into forests, and communicate across miles. They moved through the land like wind, impossible to catch, guided by rhythms the colonizers would never learn. And in Trinidad, when even bamboo was banned during Carnival, the people turned to steel. They took discarded oil drums from the colonial industries, the very tools of their oppression, and turned them into steel pans. From scrap came symphonies. From silence came sound. The instruments that had once carried oil and fire now carried rhythm and freedom. Isn't that something? To take the very weapon used against you and turn it into music. Even in North America, where the colonizers' erasure machine was loudest, the rhythm survived in whispers. Spirituals sung in the fields carried hidden instructions. Steal away didn't just mean seek God. It meant steal yourself away from bondage. The gospel trains a-comin' didn't refer to heaven, but to the Underground Railroad. These weren't metaphors. These were literal survival codes passed through song, under the noses of those who thought they had broken every spirit. In white churches, colonizers heard these voices rising and wept at the beauty, not realizing they were listening to escape plans. They saw dancing as joy, not defiance. They watched and clapped, blind to the fact that they were witnessing rebellion in plain sight. The thing is, colonizers feared what they couldn't understand, but they also desired it. And slowly, the very music they tried to destroy began to influence their own. Slave owners' children grew up hearing the rhythms. Missionaries copied the melodies into their hymns. European composers began to borrow African polyrhythms and syncopation. And without realizing it, the empire started singing with a tongue it had once tried to cut out. Centuries later, those same rhythms, born in resistance, coded in rebellion, would become the foundation of the world's most powerful music. Jazz, blues, reggae, rock, hip-hop, Afrobeat, each one carrying the DNA of a people who refused to be silenced. Even today, you can hear it. You hear it in the church choir that rocks side to side, echoing a movement that once hid pain under praise. You hear it in the child tapping a desk at school, unknowingly recreating a rhythm passed down through blood. You hear it in protest chants, in marches, in foot stomps, in drumlines, in street ciphers. You hear it when a people gather with nothing, no stage, no microphone, no permission, and still create sound. Because rhythm cannot be owned. It cannot be colonized. It cannot be buried in textbooks or erased from borders. It survives. It adapts. It waits. And sometimes, when the world goes quiet, you can still hear it. That ancient call, that coded pulse, that memory made music. The same message passed from drum to drum, body to body, generation to generation. It says, remember who you are. Remember who they were. And never stop moving. The music never stopped. It changed, yes, bent by centuries, scattered by ships, renamed by foreign tongues, but it never stopped. Like a river forced underground, it found cracks in the foundation and flowed anyway. Beneath the surface of silence, the rhythm waited. And when the time was right, it rose again. This time, in the cities. It came up through pavement, through concrete neighborhoods built to contain. Through forgotten corners of New York, Lagos, Kingston, Kinshasa, places the world tried to keep small, places marked by struggle, hunger, and survival. And yet, the rhythm still rose. Somewhere in the Bronx, a young black boy stood beside a spinning turntable, looping old records back and forth, until a new beat emerged from the past. His ancestors had once been forbidden from owning drums, from gathering, from singing their truth, and now here he was, a child of those survivors, commanding rhythm with nothing but vinyl and his hands. Hip-hop was born not from luxury, but from pressure, from fire, from what was stolen. A new sound for a new world, yet still carrying the same bones, still layered with the same hidden codes. The rhyme became the message. The beat became the drum they couldn't ban. The streets became the village square, where stories were told, warnings were given, and truth was shouted into microphones louder than any king's decree. And it wasn't just New York. Thousands of miles away, in Lagos, Nigeria, a man named Fela Kuti stood tall in defiance, a rebel with a saxophone and ancestral memory in his lungs. His music, Afrobeat, wasn't just for dancing. It was sharp, dangerous, unafraid. Every horn blast was a protest, every rhythm a sermon. He fused the traditional with the modern, the spiritual with the political. The colonizers had left his land, but their shadows remained in the systems, in the language, in the laws. So he attacked them with music. Music is the weapon, Fela said, not a metaphor, a strategy. And in Jamaica, on island soil soaked with sugar cane and blood, reggae rose. It was slow, heavy, thoughtful, a sound that carried the weight of generations. Bob Marley sang Redemption's Song, like a prophet remembering chains he never wore, but still carried in his throat. That rhythm, that offbeat swing, it wasn't just a style. It was resistance coded in sound, disguised as groove. The legacy of the Nyabingi drums played in Rastafari gatherings still throbbed behind every note. You see, these rhythms did not simply survive colonization. They outlived it. They redefined the world's sound. What began as forbidden drum beats in the forest now fills stadiums, headphones, dance floors, protests, and parliaments. From South African kam to Congolese soukous, from Dominican dembo to American trap, the bloodlines of the beat stretch wide. And underneath it all, the message still pulses. It says, we were never just victims. We were visionaries. We were never just broken. We were encoded. We hid our knowledge where you would never think to look, inside the rhythm. The colonizers had the pen. They wrote the books. But we had the beat. And the beat never lies. Even now, when a crowd rises at a concert, not because of a lyric, but because of a drop, a rhythm, a pulse, that's not just excitement. That's recognition. That's memory awakening in the body, whether the listener understands it or not. When a young girl dances to Amapiano in Soweto, when a boy in Atlanta taps a pencil to match a trap beat, when elders clap to the same gospel rhythms once sung in whispered code, the story continues. And that story is bigger than music. It is about how people, robbed of their land, their names, their gods, and their languages, still found a way to speak. It's about how even when everything else was taken, rhythm remained. Because rhythm is breath. Because rhythm is uncolonizable. Because rhythm is the first thing we hear in the womb, the drum of a mother's heart. And maybe that's why it speaks so deeply, so universally, across all lands and all wounds. The colonizers believed they had silenced the people. But what they did not understand is that silence itself can be loud. Silence can become vibration. Vibration becomes rhythm. Rhythm becomes movement. And movement becomes memory. And memory is unstoppable. So when the beat drops in a dark club or a village gathering, in a protest or a celebration, know this: it is more than music. It is a map. It is a story. It is a survival code passed down for centuries. It is the secret still singing. And we are still listening. Even after the wars were over, after the flags changed and borders shifted, the fight over rhythm never truly ended. When the chains fell, something else took their place. Schools, churches, rules, soft weapons dressed in white. New voices arrived, not with guns this time, but with crosses and grammar books. They no longer whipped bodies, but they trained minds. And again, they came for the music. They called the drum evil. They called the dance sinful. They looked into the eyes of children who had rhythm in their blood and told them to sit still, to fold their hands, to sing only what was approved. They took the movement out of worship. They took the swing out of song. They said, that part of you must die if you want to be saved. So many believed it. So many were made to believe it. Because it came with promises of heaven, of acceptance, of being civilized. But somewhere, in the cracks, the old music whispered. It never left. In small churches in the South, where gospel choirs clapped and swayed, you could still see the ancestors move. In Haitian Vodou ceremonies, where drums summoned spirits and the body became vessel, you could still feel the memory rise. In Brazilian candomblé, where worship looked like dance and dance looked like power, you could still hear the call. Even as colonizers tried to sanitize rhythm, to erase the wildness of African expression, the people made space. They wore white robes and still rolled their hips. They sang psalms in the key of rebellion. They bent holy songs until they sounded like home. The enslaved bowed their heads in church on Sunday, then gathered by fire on Sunday night, drumming under moonlight, dancing barefoot, speaking in tongues older than any empire. They never truly converted. They adapted. Because rhythm cannot kneel. Rhythm does not ask permission. Rhythm does not wait for approval. In dance, people remembered how to rise again. In every stomp, they called the earth beneath them. In every spin, they reminded the world that they could not be held in place. In every chant, they stitched language back into breath. The colonizers wrote laws. The people wrote songs. The colonizers drew maps. The people danced around them. The colonizers said, forget. The people answered, listen. And the rhythm went on. It moved in secret for centuries. In gardens and kitchens, in markets and alleyways, in lullabies sung over babies who would never see their homeland, but still move like they remembered it. And now, today, it is no longer hiding. The drum is everywhere. On stages, in films, on playlists, in fashion, in footsteps, in politics. The same rhythms that once called warriors to battle now fill speakers in clubs and stadiums. The same songs whispered to the stars now top global charts. What was once banned now leads. But here's the truth. This was never just about music. It was about dignity, about reclaiming space, about refusing to disappear. Because colonization wasn't just the theft of land, it was the theft of meaning. It tried to rename the world. It tried to mute the sacred. It tried to flatten rhythm into silence. But rhythm, like memory, is patient. It knows how to wait, how to hide, how to return. So now, when you hear the bass drop in a song that makes your whole body move, pause, just for a second. Ask yourself, who first created this rhythm? Who kept it alive when the world said they shouldn't? And if you find yourself dancing, without even thinking, that is the answer. You are not just moving. You are remembering. You are carrying the code. You are continuing the story. You are proof that the rhythm won.